Good morning.
Good morning.
That's a little different. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Brawley City Council, successor agency to the Brawley Community Redevelopment. It's our special meeting, general fund workshop here on Monday, April 29th, beginning here at 9 a.m. If we can obviously call the meeting to order, but if we can get the roll call, please.
The minutes will reflect all council members present.
Very good. And if we'll stand, we'll have the pledge by Council Member Norma Kastner. Howdy.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A little bit of reverse here, but if we can have a quick invocation from Councilmember Hamby, please.
Let's pray. Almighty God, we're grateful to you again this morning for an opportunity to gather together, to look over the city's finances and to try to make the right decisions for the direction of our city. We ask that you would guide us in that process this morning, that you would help us all to be mindful and civil and help us to see the truth of the matter. We ask that you would just help us this morning in this procedure. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilmember Hamby. Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Howdy, which will take us to the first item here, which will be the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion. Go ahead.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Go to item 2, our public appearances and comments. This portion of the meeting will not exceed 4 minutes. This is not the portion of the meeting, but whoever does come up will not exceed 4 minutes. This is also a time for the public to address the council on any items that are not appearing on the agenda and is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. The mayor will recognize you when you come to the microphone. Please state your name for the record. You are not allowed to make personal attacks on individuals or make comments that are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy. So please direct your questions to the council. Would anyone like to come up and make public comment? Looks like seeing none. Seeing none, we'll close that period. We'll move to the next item, item 3, which is the consent agenda. It appears there are no consent agenda items, so I don't need to call for a motion for that, right? We'll move to the next item. Item 4 is regular business. We have no regular business items, so we will move to item 5, which is what we are all here for this morning, which will be the general fund workshop. Number 1, and the presentation and discussion will be presented by staff.
And if I may step down to present from the front, be happy to walk
Absolutely.
through some items with you.
And again, just a reminder for the public, for those that are probably already know, some that may not, the presentation that we're going to look at, the PowerPoint is included in the council packet. And also council members have a draft budget general fund workshop hard copy in front of us as well.
Good morning, council, staff, and community. It is that time of year following mid-year budget review and the strategic planning workshop that we hold every year. What comes next is a focus on our general fund cost center and plans for the future. So I've got about a dozen or so slides I'd like to go through, and if at any time along the way you have questions or comments, certainly open to pausing whenever the council would like to pursue a discussion item or just work through the presentation until the end and proceed at that time. So what's the purpose of today? Really, this is about getting next year's 1920 fiscal year budget model established. I have been working very, very closely with our finance department, our interim director, Tyler Salcido, on reliable revenue projections for the general fund. We've also worked our way through a number of expenditure assumptions that we'll go into in some detail. Our hope today is to receive the type of feedback we need in order to kind of take the budget to the next step in the process with eventual adoption before June 30th. So today we're prepared to field questions, respond to what we can, and also identify items for further research or consideration. Okay, so what are our key assumptions that went into the budget figures that were prepared for today? What's unique to this year compared to last is that we are scheduled to have our MOUs expired with our 4 bargaining units, which are the Firefighters Association, the Public Safety Employees Association, the Sergeants Association, and our Teamsters unit. So knowing that those are expiring and not being clear on what exactly the future features will be, those are key assumptions into the model. We are assuming for today's discussion no implementation of merits. And you're going to understand a little bit more why that is when I walk through the assumptions. I want to also touch on a number of topics that have been carryover topics from prior years or are representative of current matters in front of our city departments. While I think everybody here at the city understands the significance of the work carried out by Parks and Recreation, there is no assumption that the position of Parks and Rec Director is reestablished in the operation. So there's no new director position identified. It assumes that the ongoing responsibilities of Parks and Rec would be absorbed by others in our operations. There is also assumed no fire marshal position. And similar to Parks and Rec, while we understand the demands and recognize the demands that are facing the department as it relates to fire administration, the administration of policies within our fire department, we cannot and have not assumed that this position would return to city operations. So we are holding steady on the total number of FTEs assumed for the general fund cost center. Although we currently have a license agreement with AMR, we're not assuming that it's moving forward, although it was a topic that we discussed in our projections, but because we have no certainty about those ongoing arrangements, they are not assumed for July 1. And our 50% staffing plan, this is the plan that was originally implemented when Fire Station number 2 was first opened in 2012. And that staffing plan assumed 4 full-time firefighters would be added over a 4-year period. As you can see, we're in 2019, and we needed to suspend that staffing plan due to restricted or constrained, a financially constrained general fund. And so the assumption of continued suspension is a part of our projections in today's content. I want to take a moment to make special note of what is in the model, because it kind of is a little bit of an aberration from the rest, but I wanted to be sure that I captured it because it has been a subject of much discussion, dialogue, and direction from the council. So in this area, you will see that we are assuming that we'll continue to employ a temporary staffing model for certain key positions in our operations. Those include the graffiti abatement worker at minimum wage, full-time temp, the senior center coordinator at the same, 2 maintenance workers at the same. And as just a reminder, at the midpoint this year, it was determined that we would continue with the half-time code enforcement officer as a part of the model. And we are assuming going forward that would be retained, but obviously that's a topic we want to talk through with all of you. And the code enforcement officer is paid off of the salary schedule at the hourly rate a code enforcement officer would have otherwise been paid. Okay. So the books that have been provided to you today, assuming all those items that were featured, result in a gap of $902,000. Again, want to note, no merits assumed, no changes in compensation structure assumed, no addition of a director for Parks and Rec or a fire marshal, and no return of the 50% staffing plan for fire station number 2. So as we know, we build the discussion, the policy discussion year after year on where we stand financially. We're really at a very important juncture this year, and I know it's no surprise to council because so much work has been done to retain the service levels that we have to serve public demand, but this year it's a true reality check for how we move forward with our existing service levels. Clearly, our general fund expenditures are not properly paced with our revenues. A reserve patch is no longer available to the city. We have worked through our general fund reserve, and what remains is anticipated to be below the $1 million level, certainly not in keeping with our general fund reserve policy, nor some outstanding obligations that we understand to be facing the city in the not-so-distant future. So a changing course is needed, and what we're looking for is leadership and guidance from the council as to where you can stomach to see those changes. It's very clear that council has a desire to provide an answer to the public as to the types of services that are most important to them. And the difficult element of this is that there are many essential services that the city's taken great pride in providing for many years, including police and fire, parks and recreation, and library services. So these are unfortunately the types of choices that have to be made given our financial reality. So what are some of the options under consideration for the next fiscal year 19-20? We are looking at changes to the employee benefit structure. These include a number of items. I'm going to walk you through what they are because sometimes I recognize that our terminology within the agency may not be language that everyone's equally familiar with. So the first is something called the sick leave buyback program. This is a benefit that's been in the city for a number of years, and basically it sets a number of qualifying features across all employee groups, represented and unrepresented, that if an employee does not utilize any greater than 2 days of sick time in a fiscal year, and they have an elevated balance that's been accrued year after year, those individuals are given the opportunity to have sick leave bought back from them. And that sick leave buyback occurs in July of every fiscal year. This was an item that we discussed extensively in last year's budget process, and the reason it's returning is per direction at that time, because sick leave buyback is implemented with the following year, you actually have to make a change right before the fiscal year in order to affect the subsequent year. And with the delays in budget adoption last fiscal year, in November, the July payout had already occurred. And what's represented in the parentheses is without a distinction for general fund cost center versus any other cost center, we expect that sick leave buyback based on eligibility, that doesn't mean everybody will tap it, but based on eligibility, $50,000 overall is available for payout or identified as available for payout through the budget structure, and $35,000 of that is general fund cost center related. The remaining 15 is across the enterprise and special funds for eligible employees. Cash in lieu of benefits. This is a familiar item, I think, to council because we've spent a lot of, we put a lot of staff time and effort in discussing cash in lieu benefits in the last 12-month cycle. This is a benefit that was actually removed from unrepresented employees last fiscal, or the fiscal year that we're currently in, with an effective date of January 1, 2019. And what we are looking at in the go forward with all of our represented groups is the elimination of cash in lieu of benefits. This is for individuals who do not participate in the city's benefit, medical benefits. If they don't participate and provide evidence of coverage that's outside of the city CalPERS medical product, they are eligible to receive cash instead of the city's benefit. Now, what does this amount to? It's based on the family structure of an eligible employee. So, for instance, if you have an employee with a family who is married, or a spouse or domestic partner with children, the eligible amount is set at $871 per month. As you can imagine, this is a significant cash benefit to employees who don't participate in the city's program. And so the payment of that, based on today's profile of every employee and their individual eligibility, so for those who have aren't part of the unrepresented group, because that savings has already been realized this year, but instead are part of one of our represented employee organizations, the amount overall that is paid out is $443,000 per year of cash in an employee's hands to offset whatever they choose, but could be for their medical coverage elsewhere, whether it's a standalone product or use of a spouse's coverage. For the portion that is the general fund, only that which is carried by the general fund, you'll see the majority of employees who benefit from cash in lieu of arrangements are are in the general fund cost center. So police, fire, portions of our parks and recreation staff. Okay, so an option that staff has identified as available for cost savings would be looking to eliminate the sick leave buyback program and eliminate the cash in lieu of benefits to achieve considerable savings across the city, but most significantly to the general fund. Some other options that we have begun to take a very close look at are looking to implement greater cost recovery strategies across the board. In particular, in areas where the general fund is providing services but has not modified its fee structure, or the city has moved forward with absorbing in the past as much of that cost as possible to continue to service the community. Those areas preliminarily identified include credit card processing. For some of our longer folks who have been on the council longer than others, you may recall in relative recent history, we began the credit card processing feature for utility billing, as well as at various departments throughout the city where there are many financial transactions. We'd previously had to inform our customers that credit card payments were not something that the city could receive. Well, when we rolled out credit card payments, we had extensive discussion as to what that fee structure would be to offer the convenience. And you may recall we called it a convenience fee that was very, very limited to offset some of the expense, but not the maximum available by law to assess for use. So kind of bigger picture, with the rollout of credit card processing, we actually incur more in fees and charges from the credit card and banking companies to offer that convenience to our customers, and we don't pass on the maximum charge. Instead, we absorb a portion of that transaction fee in the city operations. And if that's an area that council would like to see us look more extensively at, we would happily bring back to you on any of these topics kind of greater detail if there's interest in any of these bulleted items or others as well. A little bit earlier this fiscal year, the city moved forward with engagement of David Tausig and Associates. The discussion of emergency medical services and fees for charges was a widely discussed topic in our last budget process, and our initial interest was in determining how much recovery we could get from insurance companies for fees charged on medical calls. And we continue to learn more about this area and expect to have some content coming to you in the very near future. But one of the unfortunate revelations along the way is that EMS charges cannot be assessed to Medi-Cal or Medicare patients because the city is not the transportation entity. So when you look at the payer mix in Imperial County and in Brawley itself, assuming a payer mix somewhere in the range of 75 or 80 to 20 or 25% being private, our ability to recover a large portion of the costs, which our last conversation was in the realm of $200 to $250 per EMS call. The recovery potential is limited. So we're continuing to work through with David Tausig and Associates options that might be available to the city for various types of fire-related calls that we carry out here in the city, and I'll have some more information for you in the near future. The false alarms is another area that also was discussed extensively in the last budget cycle, and we have since moved forward with ordinance changes to implement those. We have discussed in very general terms the ability to look a little differently at some of our parks and recreation programs and services. Regrettably, we do not have Marjo here at work with us this week, but we do have other members of our staff here prepared to speak to what our current charges are at Parks and Recreation for things as commonplace as the example I often use. It's 50 cents for a child to gain access to the pool. It's a very reasonable fee for 5 weeks of summer day camp, well under $100 for 5 weeks of program participation. I know this has been a sense of incredible pride to the city to be able to make all of our programs universally acceptable to all children, but that kind of significantly lagging cost recovery orientation has in years when costs continue to increase, these are areas where we can perhaps make small or steady increases over time that get us closer to the actual cost recovery. And then last but not least, under cost recovery strategies, and I'm sure there are many others, happy to explore with the council any ideas you may have, are in the animal control realm. What do we charge? Our ordinances actually have a lot of elements to them that could be more rigorously approached from the point of view of assessing fees for people whose dogs we take into our custody, who may or may not have dog licenses. There's fee structures that go along with these activities that have not kept pace with the costs that we incur as a city to perform those services. Another area for the 1920 budget that you might consider are in the realm of voluntary contributions. These are organizations that we have historically supported. The city has seen these entities as being very important partners to the city that bring value, and suggesting their elimination as a potential option is not meant to take away from their work, but rather offer some temporary or otherwise measures to take a look at contributions on an annual level. And you know, those entities that are specifically referenced here are IVEDC, the Imperial County Film Commission, the Chamber of Commerce. Those are all currently voluntary contributions. Okay. And then with reference to staff reductions, you know, as council knows, staff comprise the majority of our budget. The cost of employee compensation is the majority of our budget. If we were to take a look at eliminating funded positions, the temporary positions as a general rule and an MOU item are those which go first in the process. So just want to provide a placeholder to that future topic. Okay, so what other alternatives are there? Those that we have control over. So I don't want to perhaps underemphasize the benefit of growing revenues. On the revenue side, our goal is always to continue to grow as a city, but what we have control over is not the local, state, and national economy. What we do have control over is the expenditure side, for the most part. Those costs that we can determine on a going forward basis if we wish to assume responsibility for in the future. So other alternatives that the council might consider are looking differently at how we provide our services. Can we afford to retain all of our departments as they're currently configured? In past years, we have, I know the go-to place that often gets presented to me as a possibility, we have looked at and said, I'm not sure we could do it lower cost if we were to, for instance, hire a landscaping company to perform lawn mowing. Because of our current pay structure for maintenance workers and the temp structure that is a complement to it, we literally could not reproduce it in a contracting structure. We're doing it as lean and cost effectively as we possibly can. So that wouldn't be an area that we could look at. But are there others? I will ask, for council's input and guidance in that regard. And, whether there's an elimination of a service or outsourcing to secure similar services is a topic for debate and discussion. So what I'd like to do next is take kind of a historical look at our top 4 revenue sources. And with the assistance of Tyler Salcido, we're well positioned today to speak through what we are certain about. And what we're certain about is some very modest growth in revenue projections. What we show are the last 3 years of current accepted and audited financial statements, what we show as the revenues actually received. And you can see for property taxes, in 2015 we were at 1.6. In 2017 we were at 1.7. So not an enormous shift in property tax revenues. And we are not expecting in the go forward a departure from that modest growth projection. So you'll see what we've got as estimated figures in our year-end closing documents, as well as the current budget and what we are proposing in our budget books for 2019-20.
the VLF swap, you see a different, a little bit different of a swing in that modest growth from year to year isn't quite what you see in property taxes. From one year to the next, 19 to 20 estimated, we have a swing of about $34,000, not a major change. On the sales tax front, we, as council knows from our HDL quarterly statements, the city experiences significant swings in areas where the sales tax generation is concentrated. So you look at our highest sales tax producers, and in that realm, we're going to see an incredible reliance on the fuel industry and what that lag time between fuel sales and receipt of revenues. All of these figures are developed very closely in communication with both the County of Imperial and our HDL, our outside consultant who performs our sales tax audits. So you'll see on that front a actual reduction in anticipated revenues. And then the last item is the utility user tax, and I think this is, I'm going to take a few moments on this because the utility user tax is once again going to be up for renewal in the next election cycle in 2020. That utility user tax can only be considered by the voters at the same time as municipal office holders their election. So we have one chance in 2020 to reestablish the utility user tax if that is the wish of the body. Last year, 2 years ago, as we were moving our way through renewal, we found ourselves as a city at a very significant crossroads. The technologies associated with the utility user tax were in some ways, perhaps the utilities associated with them, utilities in decline. And an example of that, I think that might make sense for everybody is as consumers are much less likely to retain a hardwired phone line, we see increasing reliance on cell phones. Cell phones are not subject to the utility user tax. A very substantive discussion was considered by the city as to whether or not the utility user tax should change in terms of its scope and reach in the last renewal process. A decision was made at the time to just leave it as is. So with declining utilities such as phone lines in the home or cable television, those declining applications will translate over time to declining utility user tax. And we do expect in the next fiscal year to see those changes evident. Any questions on this slide? I know Tyler is prepared as well to talk through any of the items and our consultation with other entities. Yes?
I may have questions, but I think I'm going to hold those until you're done with
Okay.
your presentation because I'm making notes.
Would council like me to speed up or keep it as?
I think we're doing fine.
Okay.
Just keep on.
Okay. Okay. What this next slide shows is, well, what is the bottom line at the close of our audit years? And we are currently through the 16-17 audit that was accepted by the council in late 2018. What we show is revenues and expenditures that aren't perfectly aligned, and some of those reasons are due to a stated intent of the council to keep service levels as high as they can be. And the trade-off has been we've hoped to rely on general fund reserve expenditures and realize economic improvement in the local landscape in any given fiscal year. So that difference that you see represented at the side That far right column is the capture of when we went through the entire course of the year, July 1 to June 30. At the end of the year, our expenditures booked were in excess of our revenues in the door. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't have an intent to perform capital projects. If capital projects were undertaken in that year that were general fund supported, they would fall into that difference category. So this is meant to show kind of what came in the door, what was spent. This is where we landed. We are currently in knee-deep in our, I should say probably more like waist-deep in our review of the 17-18 audit year, and we hope to have figures for you here in the near future. We're just not comfortable at this juncture reporting out where we stand at the close of 18 just yet.
And Roseanne, is it
Yes.
safe to say that just this particular graphic up here, that difference was primarily made up with the general fund reserves over those
Yes,
years?
entirely made up by the general
Okay.
fund reserve. And when we see, a general fund figure or a carryover balance each year, that general fund figure has significantly diminished. Okay, so, I think the natural question to ask, well, have you been growing? Is this the reason why? We have not been growing. What we have experienced is the cost of doing business significantly increasing. So our staffing model, general fund only, this does not include the vast majority of public works personnel who are funded through special and enterprise funds, which takes us about to 140 roughly full-time positions. What's shown here is that the general fund today, as we know it, supports 113 and a 1/4 employee. The 3/4 of that individual is absorbed by the enterprise and special funds. It's an admin role at the Public Works Department. Okay, so when we look at the general fund by type of expenditure, the four areas of greatest dollar value are employee compensation, and that's all in, CalPERS, medical, all features, at $11 million. And again, this is assuming all of those items noted early on in the presentation, no merits, no change to the unrepresented employees. They're still not receiving the cash in lieu of. This is the go-forward numbers that we have for the moment. We have a total value of 11 million. Supplies and materials, this is what we use to carry out our work, 885,000. Specialized services amount to about 2.3 million, and other is a 1.3. And that figure may grab your attention, and it should, because it's not a debt service feature that we've seen in prior years. That debt service line entry is due to the pension obligation bonds that were issued by the city for the side fund. That side fund is now no longer a payment to CalPERS. We were able to control or minimize the impact of the discount rate changing with CalPERS, and instead issue debt. But now we have debt service payments, and our debt service payments amount to about 1.3 million per year, and that will be the go forward. If we translated that item to CalPERS only, we would every shift in CalPERS contribution rates would be experienced there. Instead, we now have it in a debt service payment. Okay, so what this slide intends to show for the budget books that have been prepared, how does every department kind of line up? And what you can see is out of 100% pie and a $15.5 million budget, whether it's services or personnel or supplies and materials, all those cost centers, when broken down into a department level budget, have a percentage allocated or identified with those expenditures. And so, for instance, let's see, we can take the city attorney's budget, for instance, represents $120,000 a year and less than 1% of city expenses. Or if you wish to look at, how do parks, the senior center, rec leagues, and let's see, where is our library? If you lumped all of them together, where does that get us? And if you follow that right-hand column, you would take 5.5%, 4%, and about 3.5%, and combine those together to kind of understand what is the city devoting as resources. Or the flip side, you can take public safety and say, what is it? How are we expressing our values in these allocations? Police represent 35.6% of the overall $15.5 million budget. You'll see that is actually the largest department in the general fund cost center.
What's non-departmental, just above?
Examples of non-departmental might be IT infrastructure that is part of keeping the whole system alive. You'll also see that the debt service allocation is in the non-departmental. And we're looking for a way that we can reasonably, because one thing that's happened in our discussions that I think is super key and hard sometimes for our employee groups to understand is that it appears that the CalPERS payments have reduced significantly. But the reason the CalPERS payments have reduced significantly when you look at department is because we issued pension obligation bonds. For accounting purposes, the payments for the pension obligation bonds aren't shown under employee compensation. They're now under non-departmental. And so those non-departmental payments, which are a very large number, they're not paid to CalPERS, they're paid for debt service, but are still part of employing the people that are a part of our operations. Any other questions on this particular item? Thank you, Donnie, for that one. I'm glad you...
Yeah, we can round back. but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so where are we today on the general fund reserve? Today, we're most comfortable reporting on our audited financial statement figures. In 15-16, we were at 3.7. In 16-17, we were at 1.7. And 17-18, we expect to be definitely below $1 million, but we don't have more specific figures for you today.
And just a quick question. With respect to the 15-16 general fund reserve, I do believe the year prior we did receive a one-time payment that inflated that figure, right?
Right.
Is that-
We had one-time payments, and then we also, between those years, did things like account for priorities that were defined through the budget process we set aside $500,000 as a city for pool-related, Line Center pool-related improvements. We had a set-aside for the Abe Gonzalez park fence that was maybe under $30,000. There were a series of items that the city prioritized and basically used as capital, they were funds for capital projects to undertake. And since that time, those dollar amounts have been reduced by the cost of things like the pool heater replacement or any other major needs at our pool facility. With that, either myself or Tyler would be happy to answer any questions you may have about the presentation.
Open it up to council. I'm sure everyone was taking notes. Maybe we could just, whoever wants to lead that, because I'm sure it's going to go kind of back and forth. And then obviously I also want an opportunity as we're working through that for members of the public that may want to come up and pose some additional questions or maybe perhaps some ideas. So start with, looks like Sam, eye
Well,
contact.
I have 8 questions.
Sure.
So, or more, so I've got notes on those, but I'll go down them one at a time. And they basically relate back to the slideshow. On the current shortfall that you indicated, $902,000, do we anticipate that the reserve will be enough to cover that this year, or are we even sure?
No, we do not anticipate it will be enough to cover the.
So we expect the reserve to be below $900,000?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And so well, until we get that information, I think that's gonna be something we're gonna have to look at again when we do get an accurate figure on that. Okay.
I think that was, Sam, just for the public, I think that was in the reality check slide about the reserve patch not available. Is that,
Right,
I'm
right.
assuming that's what was meant.
I got that,
Yeah.
but it does say there will probably be a general fund reserve balance, whatever that
Yeah.
amount would be. Normally, in a budget process, I would use that to offset if I have
Mm-hmm.
to. If I have a shortfall, I'm gonna utilize reserve. Until I utilize the entire reserve, I don't consider necessarily that I have a shortfall. I have a reserve policy, and I have a certain amount of money put in the bank. If I have money in the bank, I don't consider myself being broke necessarily until that money's utilized. But I understand our philosophy about that in the reserve policy and all of that.
Right,
What
and
I'm
just as a
saying is just
placeholder,
reality.
that might be helpful, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on a closed session topic.
Right.
The significance of cash in lieu benefits and the impacts of the San Gabriel case,
Correct.
we do not expect to have a reserve available.
And that's an indication, yes, and I do know that. Don't think though that the public knows that, but I think that's an issue that we've been struggling with for the last, 3 or 4 months anyway, maybe a year. So I know all those factors. What I'm saying is we're trying to get information. We don't have all the information yet, but we're working towards that. Okay. Let's see. Let me see. All of this on the adopt the cost recovery philosophy on all fronts. When I look at that, I know what I want to, no, let's go back to changes in employee benefit structure. On the sick leave buyback and the cash in lieu of benefits. On the cash in lieu of benefits, you'd indicated that it's $871 a month if they have a family. If they take the insurance, what does that cost the city?
So it depends on the employee group.
Correct.
And the MOU in place. What I can speak to are unrepresented employees, because that feature is known. And what the prior bargaining units had in their MOUs.
Okay.
So, and Shirley, if I could have you up for a moment. I'll speak first to unrepresented employees currently have a benefit structure of 75-25 if they participate in the city, if they enroll in the city medical benefit.
Okay.
I'm going to have Shirley walk through our bargaining units and how theirs are structured.
BPSEA, BPSA 75-25. So 75% of the lowest product would be per select, and a family coverage is roughly, let's call it $1,200. So we would be paying the 8, they would be paying the 4. Or is it 9 and 3? I look at my finance guy, I think it's 9 and 3. So 900 the city's paying, 300 the employee would pay. But the top product, which is PERS Care, is $2,300 a month. So it's 75% of whatever medical choice they want to make. And if they qualify for family, that means they have documentation,
Okay,
marriage
but
license.
I guess the question I'm trying to get at is, if it costs us $871 a month that we give them in cash in lieu of,
Right.
what's the ultimate, in other words, we won't save all of this, I think we put $493,000. In other words, a portion of that funding, people will opt for the insurance because they're not getting, they may possibly opt for the insurance because they're not getting the cash in
That's
lieu.
true.
That's gonna cost the city money at
That's
that point in time.
that's true.
So our savings will not be the full approximately $500,000. It would be less than that, if I'm correct in this. It might be half that, it might be a third of that, it might be 3/4 of that. We really don't know that at this point in time.
That is true. In my past experience, well, one, I should say, they're taking the cash in lieu because they have coverage elsewhere, and for the most part, it's better coverage that I found historically is why they're there. Taking it away, I'd be surprised if we get anywhere near 50% coming back on. I would say probably 20% roughly would come back on.
Okay, so 20%, so you can kind of figure from there. So our cost savings would not be the $493,000, it would be more, and that's an estimate, I'm sure, but it would be more like, we're talking, we might get $300,000 out of that in cost savings, and the rest of it might go back out in cost.
And I just clarify, you said on the lower plan, it would cost the city, or it cost the city like 900. And on the higher plan, how much did you say it was?
The monthly
75%
per month is
2,300.
roughly 2,300 and some odd change, let's call it 2,400.
Uh-huh.
And the 75-25, I don't have the math,
Okay.
but I'm sure Tyler can.
But the plan is about 2,300 a month?
It's just over 2,300 a month.
Okay, thank you.
Just for Councilmember Couchman's information, with the unrepped, we had approximately 10 employees that were taking cash in lieu. Only one employee came back.
Came
the
back
plan.
on, so that's like 10%. Oh,
And the bargaining units with BFFA, it's the allowance that was stated,
okay.
and Teamsters is an elevated allowance.
Okay. All right, that answers my question. Okay, on adopt the cost philosophy on all fronts, on the credit card process and the EMS, the false alarms, the park rec programs and services, we'll have to look at that, animal control. How much are we estimating that would save us in an overall?
Well, I think what we would first want to do is hear where your openness is to considering, and then we can work our way through potential cost scenarios associated. We would need to amend our, potentially our ordinances and resolutions in place to address fees and charges. My suggestion is that we not look at 100% cost recovery, because 100% cost recovery would probably eliminate anybody from accessing the services.
Right.
So it's just
We want
some
to be careful.
form.
That's a balancing form. And, you know, the only thing, on most of those, you're not going to receive a substantial amount of money by charging the fees anyway. On parks and rec programs and services, you can up the fees to the children and the families and all that kind of stuff, but it's a minimal amount of money no matter what we do. I don't think we're going to recover, full cost recovery, I think, is out of the question on all of that. And so it's just something we need to talk about, but maybe we need to plug a figure in there
Yeah,
eventually.
and I would agree with that, but we do need to look at these things. For
Yes.
example, credit card processing, that's what, like 20-some thousand dollars a year,
The last time we looked at it, I believe it was 28.
$28,000, so it
And
starts
it's
to
only
add up.
increased
That's right,
with
it's only
time.
increasing,
So, yeah.
And so we can do a full cost recovery in that, because, you know, that could be, you know, just a convenience fee that's normally charged anytime you use any other service like IID or anyone else. So, but I would agree with other parks and rec programs, we're not going to do 100% cost recovery, but anything to help offset cost, I think, is very important. So-
Right, and maybe one way to consider it, the potential changes are, if we haven't, as a city, changed the fees in 30 years,
Yeah.
maybe it just deserves another look at it
Yes.
for some migration upward.
And
The
not
re-
just that, but we need to implement them. If we are going to do that, if we are going to revisit fees, we need to make sure that we're implementing the fee, because I know we've changed fees in the past and not necessarily implemented them. So
Right.
that's also very important. Anyway.
Because the blowback is always there
Right.
for change in charge. And I want to be sure that everybody knows, I'm not trying to pick on any feature of our city operations. Instead, it's to show, for the general fund cost center,
Yeah.
these are the services that we think we can make an argument for
Why
charging.
why don't we, since we're on that, if, you know, I know you have more questions, I was only three, but maybe while we're on that, I think a lot of us will probably have, we can knock out a lot
Sure.
of our questions. Why
Sure.
don't we go down just line by line? George, what do you think on just start with, you know, credit card processing fee, what do
that's
we want to
fine.
do? And just kind of
Just
move
full
forward and knock
recovery,
those
I
out, and then we
think.
can move on to other items. So, okay. So, credit card processing, it's costing approximately, it sounds like 28,000
We
round
haven't
number.
revisited all figures, but if this is something you're willing to let us look at and consider changing, be
I think
happy
we have to
to.
look at it.
I'm in favor of doing that.
I am as well.
I am too.
Luke?
I do have one question about that credit card
Yeah.
processing, and I think my concern is that, that we do something like argue over $10,000 when we've got a much bigger picture. But my question about credit card processing is if you can find out if there's a tipping point where people will stop using the service because they don't want to pay the extra 3% processing fee or whatever it is. Does the city have a flat rate that they have to pay the processing company in addition to the 3%?
Yes, there's a portion that actually we legally can't charge to the consumer, and there's a portion that we share with the consumer. And so what the city, and I don't know if council, maybe 2 or 3 council members may have been present, we changed the policy because originally, when we rolled it out, we found that the credit card option was being exercised by very, very large customers, which meant because it's a function of the dollar value that's processed, we would have, for instance, maybe, let me just use an example, a entity that's going to pay
permit fees in a 5-digit form. They're going to pay, let's say they chose to come in and pay with their credit card. And then there was a massive charge associated with the credit card processing transactions. So what we did was bring the policy back to the council, lower the value. So because really the goal for that credit card processing was to assist our
Residential,
utility billing
sure.
customers and hopefully reduce the load of people who are standing in line with cash payments or otherwise. What we found is that honestly, we have a very traditional community that much of it still wishes to walk-in payment, even with the drop box and credit card options that are provided. So we have an array of ways that we're happy to receive folks' payments, but the tipping point is really, if they didn't do the transaction, we wouldn't be incurring the cost. So I guess,
Yeah,
what is
there's-
the value of the convenience?
Yeah.
But I guess a flat rate, I mean, if we're paying a user fee, so to speak, just to use their services, and if no one uses the service
We're
because
not. It's a function of cost
Okay.
of the dollar charges.
And IID does charge a cost.
Yes,
I
they
mean,
do.
there is a fee to IID when you pay with a credit card now. So I saw that the other day.
Very common format.
Yeah. Roseanne, looks like a member of the public, might-
Yeah.
while we're on that topic. And you're gonna have to come up, sir, if you could.
On the credit card processing
And
fee.
if you could state your name too.
Mike
Yeah.
Morris, El Centro Motors, Brawley Quick Lane. On the credit card processing fee, California it was not legal in California until just recently. It's 3%. You can charge up to 3% per transaction, and we charge 3% on every card we take. If a guy comes in and puts $25,000 down as a down payment, 3%. I mean, I believe you're probably paying anywhere between 2.5% and 3% for processing. I mean, that's a huge cost to the city on all of it. And basically, most people are doing it for miles. So the people that are paying that 3% really don't care about the 3%. They're flying to Rome or London with their families. They don't care about that 3%. It's, the Joe consumer may complain, but then Joe consumer can write a check for it too. But it's a huge cost savings for you guys. Can I say one more thing while I'm up here? Times are tough. I got it. What we haven't addressed today at all is growth.
I think we have.
We got to
Maybe
raise the
not
sales
in
tax,
depth,
man.
but Yeah, it's one of the graphics that was presented. But
Raise the sales tax. Let's get this town moving again. We're just staying in the same position we're at. But I'll go sit back down. But the 3% is a huge revenue. It came out to over $60,000 a month for our company, for the Ford store, in reclaimed revenue from credit cards that we were just throwing away. We weren't
Yeah.
charging anybody anything.
Because it is a cost that you're incurring, so no, that's understood, yeah.
Yeah, and it means a lot of money too
Yeah.
for you guys, I'm sure, especially when you got people paying, companies paying huge water bills or huge electric bills. They only want the miles. They don't care about that 3%.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
We'll do those other ones.
I don't know if we came to, so we're in agreement of moving forward at the credit card processing. Okay, so the next item there would be the EMS discussion, cost recovery.
I think that one is one that we've already recommended that we move forward, and we're just waiting
as
for that to come to us, but I think we were all in agreement on that one. So do you have an anticipated date on when we'll get a little bit more firm?
Before the end of the fiscal year. So we were looking at a number of features. Our scope for the engagement was limited because of the cost of the study. So all of these, some of them are simpler to develop a policy, and some we really need to use the outside services to make sure we're bulletproof for charges. And in this case, the EMS component is being performed by David Taussig and Associates. And they did have some concerns. We use the area of fire-related calls as well, which have been rejected as defensible.
Okay,
So-
it would just
It's going to be
the,
very limited. EMS, false alarm calls, there's a couple of areas that we're considering that are, can be
established without a significant risk to legal challenge.
But EMS is one of the highest percentages, right? That are-
It is the highest percentage. It's, I think, 1,700 calls per year is our figure. But the issue is that the payer mix
Payer
is
mix is
Medicare and
But we're
Medi-Cal
still-
slanted.
But there's still an amount,
We'll
there's
still
still an
get-
amount that we may be able to receive, and I
Right.
think we should go for
Yes.
that amount.
Yes.
So we're talking 20% of what we originally.
20 to 25%.
Yeah, of the payer mix. And
then
that's
whatever-
assuming
and
whatever
then-
percent
and
recovery out of
recovering
that.
Yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
we can
Then
from
you
that,
gotta
yeah.
try to recover.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
it's
but
a plus. So, good.
All right. It sounds like we got a consensus there, moving into false alarm, which has already been discussed and I believe implemented, but.
Very
is there-
modest
yeah,
revenue
it's-
changes.
Parks and Rec program services, obviously, that's a big
Look at those.
discussion, so we'll open it up for that. And maybe just since I'm on that, my only comment, Rosanna presented one example of our summer day camp. And I would be, this is one of those areas, again, I think to Sam's point about, we don't want to price access, out of the market, but at the same time, we've got to look at cost. So my thoughts there might be more, maybe we can gain more in reducing cost, as in maybe number of days or something like that, because again, air conditioning, utilities, staff time, all those things are the things that add up. Not so much, for example, let's say doubling costs and somehow, cutting access to those that really maybe count on and depend those services and our residents from being able to go. So I know lack of access might be shrinking the program a little bit, might be saying the same thing, but in my belief, it's keeping it accessible for everyone in terms of what we're doing, but we need to maybe take a hard look at what are the actual costs.
So our,
of operating those
our number of
programs.
a number of weeks of summer rec programming has been reduced over the years. We operate the program, the summer day camp program for 5 weeks at $75 for 5 weeks of coverage.
Right.
Yeah. And so, one feature could be we could hire less people. They're primarily
Yeah.
minimum wage workers that are
Right.
college students or teachers that are off for the summer and seeking employment.
Rosanna,
those
for us
things.
on this topic, it's more just, it's just cost benefit or kind of seeing, I mean, I don't know
Okay.
how deep
Gotcha.
in the weeds you want to get, but really understanding what are we going to save by even doing anything here versus what it costs. If it's significant, that's something for us to look at. But I just, I don't know if I'm speaking on behalf of council, it's just, it's lack of understanding of really kind of what the P&L is there. What are the cost inputs?
Right.
The access questions, what are we going to save if we were to, and if it's a modest savings?
Examples will be, if folks may have seen some of the discussions going on in Calexico recently around reserving fields and light charges. What we do by not having charges associated with those activities is get everybody from out of town using Brawley facilities because we are so incredibly accessible. Now, it doesn't mean that the diehard entities that are Brawley through and through in terms of the composition of their athletes aren't going to be upset to see a $10 change or a $20 change or a $30 change. I think we're at the point, though, that we can't afford to continue this model. We're going to find ourselves with no choices.
And I think our previous discussions, we came to agreement, I think, as a council to move forward
Yeah.
with that exploration,
We
right?
talked
So I know
about
this
that.
is not new, so.
It's not new, but
Yeah.
the difficulty is we have no Parks and Rec director, and the admin capacity is limited.
So do they have any kind of information for us at this point as to
To
what-
date, not with reference to this particular topic, no. I don't have information I can share with you today.
Because I think that we all heard this since last year and maybe the year before, of all of these teams coming from even Mexicali, Calexico, Yuma, to use our fields, and I was kind of taken aback by it myself, because I said, why are they all coming over here? Well, now, then I found out because they're not charged. So obviously, that's a definite place that we have to look at, and
Again,
and
those
the-
charges are modest, just, to give
and
you
the
a.
community, and the community, from my, just being out at the fields and baseball games and so forth, they're all willing to pay. I think they're all willing to pay. They understand because they really don't like the competition coming from the other cities to fight over the fields?
I think there will be resistance to change from
Maybe
our
a little.
local stakeholders, but if they see that we are fairly implementing across the board and no one is given
That's gonna
a
be the key.
pass.
That's gonna be the key.
Right.
Implementation.
Yeah, no
making it-
favoritism
yeah,
along
it's
the
just-
way, one sport versus another, girls versus boys, institutional versus non-institutional stakeholders, kind of all, if we're consistent, that's kind of, our best friend is consistency.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's where I think
Yeah.
we need to be consistent. If we're gonna implement fees, then implement them and implement them consistently. If we don't do that, it's going to not work effectively. And that's where we're gonna have pushback and everything else. But, yeah, if there's cost and we need to recover, I mean, just recently we visited the topic of having a set charge for closing down, street closures, right? And so there's significant expense in that, and if that's done multiple times a year and we're not collecting anything, well, then there goes $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 in a
Right.
year that we could be helping to offset things. And, if you start looking at everything together, that's where you're looking at $60,000, $80,000, $120,000 a year that we could, and you gotta look at it, 3 years of that's 360 grand, whatever it is, right? So it starts to add up quickly. But I just feel if we're going to adopt, we do need to be very consistent with implementing the cost and not being afraid to say, no, everybody pays this. So, anyway, just a comment.
So are there any other areas, other than those identified, that council would like us to take a closer look at and come back to the body with more detail?
So for clarification, because we left off on parks, so an animal control, are you looking at that already also, or do
If
you
there's
need
a
direction?
willingness from the body to consider charges that are increases in these areas, as you know, and actually you'll see in our budget book, last year we were put on notice for, we don't provide, just as a matter of, for the community to be aware of, we don't have our own animal sheltering services. We contract with the Humane Society to provide those services. The system as a whole really is overburdened and struggling. We have no plans in the future to develop or construct our own animal sheltering facilities. We were put on notice last year that there will be a increase to our monthly charges, and that is represented in our budget. They did want to roll it out last year. I was able to convey to them that really those types of requests are most possible to accommodate when it's in front of a budget process, not in a fiscal year. So they were willing to delay a proposed increase.
So are we covering the cost right now by any fees that we charge?
Not covering them, no.
No. So so we really do need, I believe we need to look at that definitely, because, I mean, they're gonna increase the charges and we're not charging fees.
We
Then
charge
need to-
limited fees, a daily rate, and we work with them to, pet owners to gain their compliance. So if the animal isn't licensed, they're forced to get a license, but it's a very nominal charge. So it'd be looking more aggressively to recover the costs of providing such a high level of service.
So if you, I mean, I would like to see what it's costing us and what, is it in the report?
Yes, if
Okay.
you'd like, I can take it, I don't know if you want that level of detail, but I certainly can show you where in the book.
Do you want to look at it now?
Sure.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm just curious as to
Kind of-
what our fees bring in and how much we're paying.
Let me just shift here for a minute. We can first do revenue side and then our expenditure side. So the first half of our book, let me just see if I can quickly find our animal control department. You're on page 11, thank you. Okay, so page 11 includes animal control revenues, licenses, and permits. Amount to $3,000 in licenses. And $9,000 in fees. So that's what we're, let's say my dog gets picked up and I don't retrieve him for 2 days. There's a daily charge
fee,
associated.
That's what you're getting at.
So that's
Okay.
all that our animal control division from a revenue point of view brings in is $12,000 a year. Now, the other half of the equation is, well, what do they cost us? And so if you go to Department 241 on the expenditure side, which is on page 27, you will see that our total cost is 162,130. Now, why is that? Because we're paying a contract to shelter our animals, which is assumed at $75,000. No, I'm sorry. Hang on one second.
72,000 up to 75.
Okay. 72,000 with the increase from 65 to 72. It's going up to 72. That's the majority of our services. Our entire animal control employee compensation amounts to, with insurance, CalPERS and everything else, $65,000.
So that's the 292,000 is our total cost for that service.
162.
162 is the total.
Yes.
And we only bring in 12,000.
Yes, correct.
Right.
So I think that definitely that's an area that we need to look at increasing fees, in my opinion.
And again, just like any of these areas, it is a culture shift for our customers.
But
That's true, but
But I also think we need to remember that people pay taxes, and
Yeah.
they expect a certain service for a certain service level for those taxes. So so you can't necessarily recover all your costs through fees, because they're already paying a portion of those fees. And so what you have to balance is what it's costing you extra, increases in contractual type stuff, things that we can put fees on people. We need to probably do that, simply because it increases our revenue in terms of that coming in. But you cannot recover all of your costs. Part of that is covered by sales tax, property tax, et cetera, throughout the course of the city. So
And that's true, but I also, to counter that too, part of the service is that the service is provided, right? So that's
Correct.
part of the tax that we
Correct.
pay. I don't have a dog, why should I pay for yours? You know what I mean? So it's
That's
like,
true.
so that, we do need to look at cost recovery. I think
cost.
that there's another, but I have access to that service if I need to call or
if you
whatever
need
it
to
is,
call,
yeah.
they come and pick up the
So,
stray dog.
yeah.
My dog doesn't get out, so I don't have to pay anything, but
But
other people.
you see
do
my
this.
point. I mean, that's part of the argument
I
in
get
saying that we do need to help offset costs that we do incur, and so, and I know that the expectation of the public has been, limited fee structures in the city of Brawley. We're very accommodating. The public has great access to city staff and city council, unlike other cities, or unlike larger cities, I should say. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we can afford to continue providing all of these services at a very low cost or no cost. So anyway, that's just a.
I don't think there, I agree, I think we all agree with that. If anything, Roseanne, is just to help frame, because I know as we work our way down, coming off animal control, so let's, I think again, higher agreement,
Okay.
let's look at that and deal with specifics, right, as we go through the process.
Basically come
of-
back to you with
I think all the
higher-
suggestions,
yes.
that are being made, but I think most important, I think for us, that is going to probably be the toughest topic, is the last bullet of staff reduction. And I would go to, I think, the general fund type of expenditure slide, the pie chart. And
Okay, this way.
this graphic should pretty much frame where we're going to realize, where we're going to get expenditures to match revenues. And so that's the only reason I caution that. I know we're having the discussion on some, fees,
Sure.
that all important. They just fit into those little thin slices there.
Right.
It's the big gaping, the blue one, which is the tough one, obviously. So I think that's ultimately, as we move to that, what I think we need to be able to talk about here, so.
Just a quick note, it's blue and purple, because the debt service represents the 8% value
Right, mhm.
that's in
Yes.
there, so it's really 80% of the pie.
80%. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that 8%, that's in perpetuity,
It's until the bonds are paid off.
and how long is that term?
I can bring back to you a whole recap of our pension obligation bond
the
arrangement.
years, I can't
Yeah.
remember how many.
And I think for the public, this is not a new graphic.
No.
Every year we've gone through this process. These are essentially the same slide deck that we go through, just with different specifics, right, from one budget year to the next. But the format Generally speaking, the numbers are the same. It's just obviously, I
We've
think
hovered
it's really
between-
important, yeah. Revenues have been, however slow, they've just been steady, fairly consistent. They inch up, year by year, and I think maybe that's considered relatively normal. But it's clearly the expenditure side. The cost of doing business has gone up. I mean, it's not exponential, but I guess Tyler can, find the term for it. It's clearly outpacing our revenues, and that's, again, not new to this year. So in our effort to keep up with it, I think our strategy has been to use general fund reserves to really, in hopes of continuing to do the same activities we can to see if we can get a little bit more of a midterm, intermediate term bump in the revenues. And we've also had, this is like the cost of doing business, unexpected costs that come up as well. And I think that's going back and reminding the public of what we've had to pay out in terms of regional water fines, going through that. We went through that whole round over the last 4 or 5, years, I think it was. Also cleaning up some past financial issues between our enterprise funds and some of the stuff we've had to do, obviously. And
Then the unfunded mandates by government with respect to healthcare costs, Affordable
Affordable
Care
Care
Act.
Act, yeah.
The
which
changes that triggered, so that's another
And-
several
and-
$100,000.
And those several $100,000 weren't one-time monies. They're, again, back to in perpetuity. They're built into those figures. So, with all that said, I want to say, Rosanna, where are we moving forward to really close this gap? And what are the
So our
discussions we
intention
have?
is to get the kind of feedback that we need to bring you a balanced budget in the future. And we don't have a ton of time between now and June 30 to do so. The month of May will include a very close look at our special and special and enterprise funds, which we'll do a deep dive there as well. But at the same time, we'll be moving forward with the general fund preparation and very likely have a midpoint discussion between now and the last meeting in June, where we'll come to, once again, test your appetite for the types of shifts necessary to reach a balanced budget,
Okay.
which will be a combination fees and charges and reductions.
Okay, and fair enough. And then, Sam, I think you want to continue with some of the
I have some
questions you may have
questions.
had.
Yeah,
Okay.
just a few
Yes.
left. I'm looking at the general fund revenues historical look, and you gave us that, and you said that those are where the primary funds for the general fund come from, right? Correct?
Yes.
And when you look at revenues for 2017, and you add those up, you come out with $7,819,912. I guess, and my question, when I look at overall general fund revenues in the next picture,
Yes.
I come up with revenues of $13,996,561, which is a difference of $6,176,649,000.
How many cents?
Why is there, why, this is your major source of funding, is what you indicate to
Yes.
me, but you still got this $6 million that's not indicated anywhere in any of the slides, and maybe that's just.
If you turn to your budget book,
Right.
Okay.
the revenue page, under your colored yellow sheet, you will see the wide-ranging number of revenue sources that the city receives dollars from.
Okay.
And you'll see there's kind of a smattering of other revenue sources, such as, let me give one example that maybe could really be of assistance in the go forward. Here's a $100,000 shift in the RPTTF residual. You'll see that about midpoint of the revenue sources. So this is, okay, the RDA's dissolution resulted in the creation of a successor agency. That successor agency was overseen by the Oversight Board, and when originally created, the city was the recipient of a $250,000 per year allowance, an admin allowance. Now, the administration, this in 2019, was assumed by the County of Imperial, which reduces the number of dollars that will now be conveyed to the city to administer. So that's one of those $100,000, you see a change in a line item can really, really shift
Oh,
the
yeah.
resources
It-
available.
It always does, and I mean, that's something that we're gonna see no matter what we're into as a budget or a business or whatever. I mean, I think that's pretty much the norm. So that $6 million comes from other of these smaller fee amounts that we get all the way through. And some of those may go up, some of those may go down, but it's the revenue that we're seeing for general fund. Okay, so, well, I mean, it just kind of gives me
Exactly.
pause for, just to kind of take a look at everything overall as opposed to say this, your major source of
And
funding.
unfortunately,
Kinda
they're
look at
not
what's
really
going on.
items, there's a few that we can control locally, but
most of
otherwise
them
are
are-
driven by
Got
state regulations.
Okay, all right, so that answers that question. Okay, general fund full-time permanent staffing, we have 113.3 people. How many of those, and not to pick on anybody, but how many of those are in the public safety area? Of the 113?
17 in fire. Well, and remember, public safety is sworn and non-sworn.
It's
So
okay.
are you, you're interested in the totals of all, so,
Just for public
Okay.
safety as an overall, how many employees?
I'm sorry, I was looking at Chief 40? 46 in our Brawley PD.
Okay.
That includes chief and non-sworn.
Okay.
And 17 is fire, that includes the chief.
So 63. So 63 of the 113 are public safety.
That is correct,
This
sir.
gives me an idea. Okay, all right. Okay, let's see. Oh, on the draft budget by department, where you talk about at the starred items, where you talk
Yes.
about library lambs is $202,313. Is that the total cost that's covered by the grant? Is that what's covered by the grant? And the
Correct.
same thing for recreational leagues?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing for engineering?
yes. So the only difference that I would say, okay, the library is the recipient of an annual grant. If the library did not receive that grant in a given fiscal year, the question that would come to the council is it the end of the program, or are we going to offset the expense? But right now, it's 100% cost recovered. And we are in the round of a cycle of funding. Again, for next year, we are assuming that it will be successfully funded and 100% recovered.
Okay, so those are 100% recovered. Those three items, though, are not, they're grant funded, or they have some other source of funding?
Correct.
Rather than general fund? So-
They're shown in the general fund cost center, but the dollars are recovered through other funding mechanisms.
Okay, so when I look at this budget, when I look at it overall, I see that public safety receives over 50% of the funding for public safety purposes. But if I pull those out, they receive 60% almost, or
Okay.
somewhere in that neighborhood. Or maybe even above that, I don't know. So that just
Yeah,
shows
that's a
how
good-
important public
yeah.
safety is to the budget and to the community. So this so that I kind of know. Okay, that's my questions. So I'm finished.
Thank you, Sam. Luke? Full time? I know we have
Well,
others, so.
I just, I actually, I just want to indicate that I did talk to Rosanna about a couple of these, but I think that they're of interest, maybe of interest for the folks. In the revenue budget worksheet, one of the things that caught my eye is the impact fees, and how much impact fees we had this fiscal year through April, and then through today, it showed a much smaller amount. And to me, it kind of just highlights how important development is because of the amount of money that it brings in as far as impact fees. And when I talked to you, Rosanna, you can jump in whenever you want, you indicated that the reason for that big amount in this fiscal year was a pilot project of $13,935, but today's estimate is only $1,200. So did you want to
Sure, let me
expand a
walk
little
through
bit
it.
on that?
So
Yeah.
stepping back for a moment, the way impact fees are established is through a nexus study. That nexus study establishes the fee structure. The city of Brawley has a nexus study performed in 2010. That nexus study, the city only implemented the first 33% of those fees. Okay? So we never got to full implementation. There was an appetite to roll out the true fee structure, and instead we held at the 1/3 implementation. Of the 1/3 implementation, there are many features of city services that are considered. Animal control has a portion of an impact fee. Police and fire have elements, infrastructure has elements, and admin has elements. That portion that is shown as $13,935 is only the admin portion. It's not just pilot, it would be any new construction for which square footage did not previously exist on the lot. So it's the one thing that you can't be absolutely certain of that's coming in the door. And in this last year, for the construction permits that were processed, we had a really good year from the point of view, well, relatively good, $935 represents that value that came in the door.
And for this last year, that 11 to 12,000 is just for one item. So if you take all that out, there's 2,300 left. That to every other.
Represents everything
Yes,
else.
yes.
All infill development, all new construction.
And just as FYI, that money can only be used for the specific purposes that are identified in the Nexus study. You can't take money for what isn't listed in the Nexus study and apply it to other things. That's why we have the annual and 5-year reports to report our expenditures out to the building, the public, and the Building Trades Council.
So pretty much the amount that we show in the budget is reflected by that Nexus study. Whatever that study indicates will be.
Yes.
Whatever development is coming this particular year. Is that how that works?
No, the Nexus study is more of, it's the basic premise.
It's a benchmark
Yeah.
for the fees that are gonna be charged based on certain developments that are supposed to take place and
Right.
certain improvements, I should say.
Yeah. The basic premise is just because there's growth in a city does not mean the existing population should have an erosion of services. The new development needs to pay their own way so that the existing population of Brawley doesn't receive less as a result of new demands on the system.
The impact that they're making, they're paying for the impact that they're making, so.
Thank you.
There was one other line item that I thought was also maybe helpful because it appears like a change from the norm, which was, I believe, I'm gonna go look for pavement cuts. There was a dollar value that was in the realm of 100 and maybe 75,000, I'm recalling offhand. And that particular, I'm sorry, 182, wait a minute, page. I just wanted to note that due to the gas company performing, page 12 of the revenue side, you'll see that we received a considerable sum this fiscal year, but next year we're only anticipating 10,000. And that is a result of this year, the gas company cut up many, many, many city streets. And we don't expect that work next year, so we can't count on those revenues coming in the door to offset the expense of inspections and other activities required. Yes.
The other item that I covered with you that probably looks like a real big impact to is on page 2 with and you kind of touched on it, I think, a little bit, on the RDA Successor Agency
Yes.
Oversight Board. So you may want to just explain that one, what we were getting before and what we're getting now.
So in the first year of administration, we received $250,000, and I don't, let me just look really quick. Do you have the reference number of this year's? I'm not seeing it.
Which
right
page is
now.
that on?
Page 2, the Successor Agency amount down at the bottom.
Oh, 25,000 is,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the portion, so from 250 to 25,000.
Right, so that's a real big.
It has, but the flip side of it is that the
No more
amount of
work
time that the
Yeah.
city
Yeah.
devotes to administration is very limited.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
then we also had some very large reimbursements recognized this fiscal year as a result of the closeout of our CDBG grants that were tied to Hinojosa Park, Senior Center, the the fire apparatus purchase and the sewer manhole rehabilitation. So that grant has now closed, and we can't count on the offset of that admin cost in the future.
Additional questions?
I had a question about, you mentioned something about capital improvement expenditures being in this figure, the slide overall general fund revenues and expenditures per audits. Do you have an idea of how much of that 15 million expenditure was capital improvement?
Very likely, it's comprised of what you see in the difference, because the operational expenditures, we've always been very challenged to match revenues and expenditures. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, on these figures, they're excluded. That's separated, that's the way it's been reported in the years, so we continue that. It's, none of the capital items are in that.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And also, there isn't any in the draft so far.
Okay.
That are assumed.
Okay. Mm, okay.
It's a lot of work that's been done so far.
Yep.
so.
George?
No, I think they've been answered throughout the course of the comment. There was a public comment with respect to a sales tax, just a remark with that. And that's something that I brought up in the past as well. I know we need to obviously look at future growth and development here, and that's one thing that I have looked at. I know we are up for renewal of the utility user tax, and that's something that, we need to discuss in the future, but I think we need to start preparing to see how things are going to function for us. But certainly a sales tax increase is something that I think we need to consider. If we're not going to be renewing the utility user tax, that represents about, 13-14% of the of the general fund now. So we're going to have to offset that somehow. Just
Right.
food for thought.
And when you look at how much could actually be gained, it's far more limited.
Right, I understand.
Sales tax generation, with the maximum allowed for an assessment, it'll yield far less than the utility user tax.
Sure.
And the challenge will be both of those items on the ballot at the same time.
Well, depending on what the utility user tax is, and if it's going to be in perpetuity, or if it's going to be in conjunction with the sales tax that is for a limited, there's a lot of ways to structure that to see if we can, because sales tax is applied to everybody, not just utility users, so that's another thing to consider as well.
And it's a consumption tax.
Sure, it's a consumption, yeah, absolutely.
Rosanna, maybe just, not that this is conclusion, but maybe, well, in case there's any other questions, maybe with Tyler's help, I also think this will be helpful maybe to the public to understand this exercise, that when we're focused on the general fund workshop, obviously this is kind of the core fund that we operate most of the city on, but not all. So I'd like to kind of review and rehash those things. The other thing is making sure there's a clear understanding of the difference between kind of the, I think in terms of business coming from the private side, obviously of profit and loss versus a balance sheet. So by no stretch of the imagination is the city in the rears in terms of its assets, its long-term current liabilities, et cetera. So in essence, our balance sheet versus our annual, this is the exercise we're going through our P&L. So, I would frame it, and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong. This is like looking at your annual household budget and realizing, hey, this is how much I make, this is how much we're spending, we need to make sure those match. Simple as that. I don't want the overcomplication of, broad-based, sometimes statements are misleading and can get out in the public. I want to be very clear again that the city's conservative fiscal position continues. It's always been our utmost priority to balance the budget. If we didn't care about balancing the budget, then we probably wouldn't be having this in-depth of a discussion, but I think it's really important. So the use of reserve funds, looking at our revenues like we do consistently, and it's not an annual exercise. I think we talk about our revenues and increasing sales tax virtually every council meeting in some form or fashion, whether it's development, whether it's new business, whether it's downtown. So is there just a quick couple minute just overview the health of the city from a balance sheet perspective versus kind of a P&L perspective?
Yes, that is correct. Now, it's not a cash issue at this point, for sure.
Yeah.
And generally, without getting too technical, what you said is correct. One example for the private sector folks, for example, it's revenues and expenditures as opposed to expense. one example of that would be the debt service for the principal payment. That is in the budget where that would be on the balance sheet on a private type of financial statement.
Yeah.
So that is an expenditure. Those are the two main differences it's different, expenditure versus expense. There's also some allocations from the other funds that will support general fund, and they're in there, whether you guys haven't got to those yet. But that is one area that I believe needs to be looked at. A study needs to be done, and it is in the current budget for one to be done. That's, if I would say, back to the Fred days, those assumptions are still there. And best practices for about every 3 years minimum to take a look at that, to make sure that we can withstand any type of challenges, whether it's from grants or public, of those allocations back to the general fund example, or out for engineering to the other funds, that type of thing. So I guess in a nutshell, what you said is correct. Basically, it's not a cash issue at this point, but there are some hard choices that we need to make so we don't get there. So
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Any additional comments, questions from council?
I just thank you for public participation and the staff.
Unless there's questions from.
Absolutely. Any further comments from the public?
Yeah, Mike.
One more question that nobody answered last time. What about Proposition W that was blown off last time we talked about it? Where we were gonna keep our current level of employees. Nobody ever answered that.
Excuse me, let me get clarification. You're talking about the utility user tax? Measure W was,
Yeah.
and your comment was, could you repeat that, was blown off?
Well, nobody ever answered it. Nobody acknowledged it. I've asked questions to other people about it. And wasn't that to maintain where we're at as far as employees, employee counts and things like that? Wasn't that what it was put in for?
Absolutely, and it's been, we've been fortunate as a city, not just as a council, obviously, to continue to support that, as there's 140 other cities that do the same thing. But Rosanna, could you cue up that, kind of that fund breakdown again? I just want to, because I thought it was clearly discussed real quick, but I'll help reiterate if I'm, there we go, it's right there. We've shown the audited actuals in the past, 2015, 2016, 2017. And it's all based on, obviously, utilities. We discussed, I think, in some detail why that's decreased. But that goes directly to the general fund. And then if you remember the pie chart,
Right.
all of that funds that pie chart.
Okay.
So that's a pretty good breakdown in detail. Were there any further questions you had on it?
Okay. So
I'm just asking.
Basically, we're basically come to a point where, as George just said, it's got to be a tax issue. I mean,
It is.
we're seven. You guys are seven. When we sell a car to somebody in Brawley, it's 775. When we sell a car in El Centro, it's 8.25. You know, obviously, we tried to open a used car lot to contribute more revenue to the city of Brawley, and it failed miserably. I talked to Larry Allen, the old owner there, and he never sold used cars there. So, I mean, we thought that was going to be a huge deal. Had a lot of challenges opening that place, and I hope that other businesses that are trying to come to this area don't receive the same challenges that we got, like the sidewalk to nowhere and, you know, things like that we wound up having to get an attorney on and come to the council with an attorney. It just seems to me, and I've been in business for 40 years, and I'm going to tell you, times are tough for us too. I mean, you know, business isn't great. But when times get tough, you got to get tougher, and we got to grow. We got to go after it. Whether it means, you know, we all get involved in this box, and the box is right there. How do we get out of this box is what I hope we're all thinking about right now. And getting out of this box is growing, obviously growing. You know, advertising, doing different things, doing fairs, doing whatever it may be. But, you know, when I have a bad time, I go to an off-site sale and I have a great weekend. I do something out of the box. And George, you know, you guys are all business people. We all got to do something to get this city out of the box. And a lot of it is the hoops that, you know, you have to jump through to do business with them. And I'm sorry, I mean, we've got a highly paid city manager here that is anti-growth, and I believe that. In the sidewalk to nowhere was the proof of it.
I'm and I appreciate that you're expressing an opinion, and I want
And
to
I'm not
I want to be
attacking
yeah
anybody.
I want to be clear on something though. We as council are very responsible, whether it's our city manager and all of our staff, obviously carrying out what the people and what our citizens want to see. So I think it's unfair to say that. And number one, the sidewalk to nowhere you keep referencing is actually a Caltrans jurisdiction. There was a city portion of it, which I think we were very negotiable
Yeah,
on
you
that
guys
part.
finally did.
But let's make sure we communicate that. We get slammed a lot. We don't get necessarily the credit for the things that we do. But here's the other thing. I support your business. I use
I
your
know you-
business. And I think most of us do.
I know
So I think the way out of this box is to do exactly what we're doing in a very public and transparent way, painstakingly go through the details without boring necessarily everyone to death, but make it accessible to everybody. Here's the reality. It's not new. That's why I kind of brought up the points. This has been year after year. Unfortunately, I think most of the public, when they look at this process, they fully entrust a lot of key public folks, as well as those of you that are here engaging, to do the right thing. And the one thing I can assure you is we will work our tails off, as we always have, to do the best we can with what we're working with. It's the unfunded mandates. There's things we can scream about, I can tell you right now in council, that we're dealt with those curveballs. We're here to work through them. I am absolutely with you. I want to see the city grow. There's not a council member that
Right.
doesn't. So that's why I want to make that clear, and I can assure you if our city manager wasn't consistent with that, we'd
And I'm
be
not
having
here
those
to
conversations.
attack anybody, and I know that I've sold 80% of you guys cars, I know 80% of you guys use my quick lane, and how many business owners do you have standing here say, please raise my taxes?
Yeah,
That's
right.
true.
You know, I mean, come on,
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
I want to help too, is what I'm trying to tell you. Anything that we can do, I'm going to say for El Centro Motors, Imperial Valley Volkswagen, and Brawley Quick Lane, anything that I can personally do to help, I want to do. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of people in this room. We just need you guys to give us a direction you need us to go to help rally for you, not against you, with you, to
Absolutely.
make it work. And again, all we're after is the same common goal. We want this to be a blooming town. We want it to be a safe town and you know, a fun town. I mean, you know, again, how many business owners want to have their taxes raised? I'm here to offer it. I'm here to say whatever I got to do. If I need to service the city's cars cheaper than you're paying your motor pool, if that would help save money for the budget, definitely she's 100% right on, and what we're doing now is temp agencies for mowing our lawns, doing all of our stuff. We're using temp agencies. I mean, you can't, I mean, it costs a lot of money to employ somebody. I got it. And especially with benefits. And in our beautiful state of California, with the cost of labor, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anything we can do, let us know as business owners, okay?
Thank you,
And
sir.
again, I'm not trying to attack anybody. I just want to go forward.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, guys.
And by the way, we really appreciate the public involvement in the budget process. Typically, there aren't any members of the public that usually join in, so I appreciate your presence and your comments.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Donnie. Andrew Colas, resident of Brawley my entire life. I just had a couple comments to make. I'm on the Parks and Rec Committee, and I kind of voiced my opinion on the 300 new trees that were going in, and I voiced my opinion that these trees, once they get big, are going to cost a lot every year to maintain. You know, if they cost $1,000 a year, you know, 300 times 1,000, that's 300 grand that we don't have to spend. We can't even maintain the trees we currently have. And so I was kind of frustrated that I voiced that opinion, and then it moved through, you know, and without, you know, a whole lot of discussion. I don't know if the board here approved it, or the city council approved those trees going in, but I don't know if we looked at the long-term cost of that. I do think there's some things I saw in the budget. I don't know if you can move your slide over to where you showed where all the line items and what costs what.
You're talking about by department, the
Yeah.
percentage one? That one?
Okay. I was, you know, I was a little surprised when I saw the library runs us about $500,000 a year. Is there any way, and then underneath another 200,000, I'm not sure what that is, but we have $713,000 for library, and I you know, I know the library is great for kids, and you know, it's good for the community, but so much of what's happening today is online, and I just don't know if that money is being well spent. You know, I don't know if there's a way we could offload the library to a nonprofit or somehow not be spending $517,000 on library costs. I mean, I don't know if there's programs that are involved with the library.
I'll just comment there. I'm sure everyone could have a comment, and not, again, disregarding any suggestions that might be made, but the library actually operates on a pretty thin shoestring, and certainly for the services it provides. So just for clarification, the library lambs, that is completely reflected of a grant, that part of the program, the literacy program, so it's a mobile literacy program, and we're the stewards of that program. So the library itself at $500,000 for a 2-branch program that actually provides a lot of services as well as a key location within the city for many other things that really go beyond even literacy, reading, checking books out. It's a resource center. It's internet connectivity. So it provides a lot to a community like ours, where maybe some of us do have internet access and, maybe take for granted the fact that, we can, we read our books and we do a lot of things on smartphones. So anyways, we're certainly looking at everything. And I'll also point out, I don't know what the number is, Rosanna, exactly, but there's a lot of volunteers actually that keep the library operating the way it is. So there's a significant portion that operates on volunteer services, which we're always grateful for.
Yeah, no, it jumped out to me as like kind of a high number when the amount of parks we have to maintain is 856,000, but then libraries, what is that, 65% of what all the parks are? I mean, that just seems like parks should be higher, and if you were to think about how many parks we have to maintain versus one library, so.
I think the parks has definitely been one of the departments that has probably suffered over the years, and could certainly, as a park commissioner, as you know, use some more attention. So is there anything else up there that jumps out?
I mean, the animal control, I agree with you guys that we shouldn't be paying $162,000 and only recuperating, what was it, 10,000 or 15,000?
Not that much, 12 grand.
So 12,000. So yeah, I mean that needs to change. I mean, I'd love to dive into these numbers a little deeper, but I know we don't have the time for that. Another quick comment I had just from you guys talking about the parks being open, the public and the cost of that. I'm not sure why we're still using the old lights from 10, 20 years ago when the efficiency of the LED and high output lights. I think you guys should look into maybe how long it would take to recoup the investment of putting LED lights up at the parks. So,
we had a Siemens Corporation actually do a study and look throughout the city. It was a great program, but they kind of matched the cost benefit of it if they go any further, and we're right on the cusp where basically the costs were going to outweigh what we were going to recapture. So unfortunately, we're having to do that really almost a fixture at a time or address things as we can. But absolutely, it's another great point. I mean, if we can replace all of our fixtures to something more energy efficient.
That might be something you want to talk to the IAD about also. Maybe they can, I know they're trying to help more with community involvement and stuff, so reach out to the IAD maybe also to help maybe switch over to LED lights there. And then, is there any way to get access to the city assets and what you guys pay in principal and interest for those assets?
It's in that.
Public information.
Yeah.
Okay. And then one last thing is I want to go to the what Mike kind of addressed about getting out of the box, and I don't know, it just seems like right now we're in a kind of a booming economy across America, and you just don't see the same reflection in Brawley. I'm not saying it's you guys up here, I'm just saying people don't really want to invest their hard-earned money in the city of Brawley, and I have my opinions of why I think that is, but I mean, I don't want to go into it and offend people, but I think there needs to be a more pro-business approach to getting businesses to come here, not looking at what can we get out of them, but understanding that these people, they provide jobs, those jobs go and those people spend money because they have a job. It's not, just, take and get as much as you can out of a business. I know, I don't work for my dad and uncle, but I know they're a large provider of jobs in the city of Brawley, and they wanted to do some expansion, and it was, hey, can you guys do this, 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 and this, and this, and then add this on top? And it's like, no, forget it. Why would we do that? So I'm not here to speak for them. I'm just using that example. I also, pitched some ideas of, me taking over the city of Brawley Airport and creating an FBO there because it's a ghost town, and, it kind of hasn't gone anywhere, and now I'm kind of over the idea just from being frustrated of, hey, I was willing to spend money, provide jobs, create a better service for people that are coming into the city, and it just hasn't gone anywhere. So it's I don't know if it's necessarily a P&L issue more than just a pro-growth focus, and pro-growth focus means you're going to make investments. Investments mean that you might lose some money in the short term but gain it in the long run. So I think Brawley needs to focus on being pro-growth, pro-business, and then you'll see your numbers turn around. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none. Rosanna, would that conclude your portion of the presentation?
The end of the content that we plan to present to you today, and we'll be returning to this body with additional information based on the feedback you've provided.
I have one-
Go ahead.
Just, I think you probably covered it, but and it's not a big thing, but when we were looking at the utility tax, I was actually kind of surprised that it's gone down instead of up. And I know we touched on the cell phones, and I don't know if that's something we may want to revisit to possibly.
We couldn't amend the ordinance until a new ballot measure was enacted.
But you indicated there was another reason for less revenue?
It's cable, it's old technologies, cable and
Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah.
And phone,
content.
excuse me.
Landline
Yes.
phones.
Yeah.
Okay,
They were part
thank
of
you.
One
And
final-
it was anticipated to decline when the measure was adopted. That was
Thank you.
part of the discussion, yes.
I just have a remark with respect to some of the public comment that was shared. I've been on council a long time, and I come from the private sector, and it's just very, very different than the public sector. It just is. The way funding occurs, the way things are managed is just very different. So sometimes, I've been very frustrated with the process because I do see things, in the public sector, just things take much longer to implement and come into fruition. In the private sector, it's very rapid. If we need something done, for example, like the example that was given where you have maybe a sale, and that can take 2 weeks to arrange and do, and then you generate revenue from it, that's not something that the city can necessarily do. That's why our planning process is long. That's why, when we're planning for parks and other improvements, they're there to last generations, not, just a few years. So, some businesses come and go, and some are, but cities generally don't go away, right? At least in our history.
Risk.
Right, and
Risk
so
factor.
it's gonna be here in 100 years, and a business may not be. So there's a lot of things that are frustrating, I understand, as part of the public process, but I do want to assure you all, and I know that it was expressed earlier with some of the comments, like with the LED lightings and other, things. That's something we consider all of the time. These aren't just one time a year, it's things that are happening at every single council meeting, and during the time between council meetings. We all meet with our community members separately, with staff members separately, and it's things that we have discussed over time. Donnie and I and other council members, but we've worked together many times in getting vendors here that provide services like efficiency studies and other things to see if it can benefit our public and lower our costs, because we don't necessarily have the ability to just say, let's turn on the faucet and generate money. Sales tax is one of them. That's really the only way that cities generate money, is through a collection of fees and taxes, right? And so we look at those things very carefully. So I don't want to leave the impression that these things are not looked at all of the time. Is it difficult to get started in business? Yes. Is it difficult to make things successful here? Yes. We get criticized often about downtown. Downtown's challenging, and there are people that are buying buildings, and I'm hoping that they rehabilitate the buildings and put some work into those things and make them happen. And I'm here to advocate for them. I certainly want to see that happen. But it isn't as easy, even when it was really a learning curve. It took me about 3 years to really get familiar and comfortable with the way cities operate, because it's very, very different than the private sector. Anyway, that was just my comment. I just want to assure everybody here that we work really hard. I know I do. I know the rest of council does as well, to understand how the city functions, to see what we can do to try to generate greater revenues for the city and offset cost and keep, our services and our residents happy. So anyway, that was just a comment that I know was long. My apologies.
Thank you, Councilmember Nava.
Just some information for everyone. There's an announcement that's going around that states that we have a meeting tomorrow here in this chambers. We do not. I believe that announcement is incorrect. So if you can spread the word around to everybody. I don't want the public showing up here and being frustrated because we don't have a meeting. So we do not have a council meeting
And to
tomorrow.
clarify, the normal scheduled meeting date is the first and third Tuesday of every month.
Right, and it just went around on Facebook and everything. Just want people to know that's not the case.
Any other comments? See none, thank you.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
I know I took up a lot of your time talking about those other things, but another issue I was thinking is going to this kind of the elephant in the room with the police. I don't know numbers. I don't know where they were, where they should be, what's happened over the last 10 years. All I know is Brawley is in an area that's very difficult with safety. The state of California, I feel, has put us at more of a risk, due to being a sanctuary state, and also, releasing people out of prison probably before they should be, sex offenders, child molesters, things like that. I think the city of Brawley, it might be a interesting idea is maybe to draft a letter to the city, to the state of California, maybe saying there's I don't know if you'd call it a state of emergency or what, that we are faced with a lot of safety issues because of policies they've put in place, and that we would like to be subsidized or reimbursed for our extra costs that we incur because of their policies. So that's just something to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Colas. And no further comment. We'll move off of item 5 and we'll move to item 6, City Council member reports. I myself will hold mine for the first meeting, and I'll go down the list.
I'll do the same.
I'll do the same.
Very good. We'll move on to item 7, City Manager's report.
Nothing further to report at this time.
Very good. City Attorney's report. City Clerk's report.
To report.
Nothing to report. This meeting will be adjourned to the regular meeting on Tuesday, May 7th. Thank you, everyone.